Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Benjamin Cure Show on this Monday, where there is plenty of breaking news, plenty of developing stories. I can't wait to discuss all of it with you guys. Just this morning, as a matter of fact, the NFL has banned the hip drop tackle. What does it mean for the league? Why are they doing this now? What does the enforcement of the rule look like? And what's going to be the fallout of the enforcement of that rule next season? I can't wait to break it down. I've got a really interesting take. I think the NFL almost wants there to be some fallout from this rule next season. I'll explain it in just a little bit. I also have before that my 2024 NFL mock draft, my top 5 picks in this year's draft. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. I could not be more excited. We are less than a month away from Selection Thursday. I think there's going to be a trade into the top 5. I think there's a team that is aggressively trying to find their guy. I think they already know who he is. If you've seen the rumors, you probably know what I'm talking about. I do not think this is misdirection. Rather, I think the rumors and the reports are because of desperation. I'll explain that in just a little bit, but we have to start with the biggest story in the sports world, across the world right now. Say it ain't Sho. Yesterday, it was announced that Shohei Ohtani would be speaking to the media today at some point. Now, I've been in this game long enough to know what this means and what they're trying to do. The MLB didn't release their press release that they were investigating Shohei until 5:37 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. They knew exactly what they were doing. They are trying to delay this another day, another week. And then yesterday, it was announced that Shohei will be addressing the media today publicly for the first time since the investigation was announced. The announcement has no start time, so no one knows what to expect. They'll probably say 1 p.m. Everyone will assume it's Eastern time, but then we'll find out it's really Pacific time. So now at this point, it's 4 o'clock Eastern time. All the biggest shows will already be done and over with by the end of the day. They'll be then finishing on live air, on tape. The press conference probably won't start on time anyway. It'll probably be a little bit late. They'll have the media waiting around all day. I know how this circus goes. Then once Shohei finally gets to the mic, he says his statement. He's done. They're going to reserve like a 15 to 20 minute questioning period for Shohei. He'll have a ton of PR bullet points that he will have perfected by today. And any interesting nuggets that are dropped, I'm willing to bet it's maybe one sentence long, and it's probably going to leave everybody with more questions than answers at this point. So with that in mind, knowing what I know, that Major League Baseball would prefer that the story goes away, knowing that this has purposely been delayed since last Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm ready to say my piece. And if any other hosts or any other programs would like to hold off, that's fine. I'm not them. I'm not going to, because this story at its very core is not changing. When ESPN found out about the gambling investigation that involves Shohei Ohtani's ex-interpreter now and potential involvement with the biggest star in baseball, Shohei Ohtani himself, ESPN did their due diligence, and they reached out to Shohei Ohtani's camp. Now, a spokesperson, a crisis spokesperson, was hired shortly after ESPN got in contact with Shohei's agent, I believe. And this is, I think, where the disaster begins from the jump. I'm going to talk about the interpreter's interview in a second, but before Mizuhara ever sat down for an interview with ESPN, Ohtani's spokesperson revealed certain elements of the story that are not going to change that I do find very interesting. 8:30 p.m. Eastern time Monday. Let's stick to the facts here. The spokesman for the first time says Ohtani paid the debts on behalf of Mizuhara. The spokesperson said that Ohtani told his agent he had covered Mizuhara's debt in $500,000 increments, a total of $1 million via wire transfers. The spokesperson quotes Ohtani saying, quote, "Yeah, I sent several large payments. That's the maximum amount I could send," end quote. At 10:30 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, Mizuhara speaks with an ESPN reporter by phone for 90 minutes from South Korea. The interview was arranged and attended by Shohei Ohtani's new crisis spokesperson. Mizuhara said Shohei knew about my debts. I told him about my debts. Shohei ended up paying my bets directly, and Shohei was in the know. So we know that based on what Mizuhara said. Now, interestingly enough, we now know that Shohei's spokesperson was on call during that ESPN interview. And if the spokesperson would have immediately done their job and spoke, I assume they would have, at that point, he would have cut off the interview. He would have cut off Mizuhara's answer, and he would have said, he's lying. Shohei didn't know about the bets. So either Shohei's crisis spokesperson is literally the worst spokesperson in the history of spokespeople, or the spokesperson at the time believed that to be true. And as a matter of fact, we know the answer. I don't need to assume. We know that the spokesperson believed it was true because the spokesperson knew that Shohei paid Mizuhara's debts on his own directly, because the spokesperson actually confirmed that story before this interview even started. This is the nature and the blessing or the curse, depending on which side you're from, of keeping track of a storyline if you're a good reporter. Remember, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on Monday, the spokesperson, according to ESPN's reporting, for the first time says Ohtani paid the debts on behalf of Mizuhara. The spokesperson quotes Ohtani as saying, "Yeah, I sent several large payments. That's the maximum amount I could send." The phone interview doesn't take place until 26 hours later at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time the next day. But still, the entire story changes. On Wednesday at 11:32 a.m. Eastern time, when Ohtani's spokesperson advises ESPN, don't publish that story, and says, quote, "Ippei is lying. Shohei didn't know." Come on. Later that same day at 2 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday, Ohtani's lawyers then issued a statement to ESPN, quote, and I'm saying, I know this is kind of boring. This is kind of what I don't like to do this, but I'm going to explain why I'm doing this in a little bit for your own information and for my safety and all this. Quote, this is the statement from Ohtani's lawyers in a statement to ESPN. Quote, "We discovered that Shohei has been the victim of a massive theft, and we are turning the matter over to the authorities." Come on, guys. Believe me, I would love to keep this straight and to a point. Just say my take. I don't like doing the runaround that seemingly everybody else does when it comes to stories like this. But I believe you, as the audience, deserve context, number one. The context that, for some reason, everybody is ignoring or just not pointing out. And my outlining of these points, number one, is to keep you informed, but it's also to keep me protected. Hashtag allegedly. I think you guys know about it. In today's day and age, you have to be careful what you say, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, and I don't want to embrace conspiracy theories online. I don't want to say that it's fact, but these are the facts, and these facts are so damning, the way that I put them, that it might as well seem like it's a conspiracy theory, but it's not. You know what's never happened in the history of an investigation? Never in the history of an investigation has someone changed their story and the rest of the world sees that and goes, "Oh, that guy's innocent. There's nothing fishy here. There's nothing suspicious. No, he's just fine." Either Mizuhara told the truth the first time and for whatever reason changed his story to that of a lie, or you were lying initially and now you're saying the truth. I personally am leaning towards believing the former is what happened here. I'm not stating that it's a fact. That is my personal conclusion, my personal opinion. And before you say, "Ben, whoa, he could have been telling the truth both times," I just told you why that's not possible. Initially, the story was Shohei knew about my bets. He knew about my debt. I told him about it. He paid it directly. That is the initial story that was backed up by the spokesperson for Shohei Ohtani and by Mizuhara's interview, his direct sound bites. The story was then changed to Shohei was robbed. There was a massive theft committed against Shohei. He didn't know. He didn't know about the bets, and he didn't know the money was taken, nor did he agree to that. Those are two completely different stories. This is not, both can be true. There's no elements in there that could both be true at the same time. The only element that could be true in both instances is that someone was gambling and someone's money ended up in the hands of an illegal bookmaker in the state of California. That is what we know for a fact. Whose it was, who made the payment, who was in the know, that I guess you can say is up to interpretation right now and is not official. I think the entire Ohtani investigation, the word that blares out to me like a horn is trust. It pops up throughout this story in all the wrong ways. Apparently, no one involved in this gambling probe knows the definition of the word trust. Shohei apparently, reportedly, did not trust Mizuhara enough after he found out about his gambling debts to give Mizuhara the $4.5 million cash because Shohei was reportedly afraid that Mizuhara would end up just using that cash to put himself deeper in the hole and to bet that money as well. But Shohei Ohtani trusted Mizuhara enough to pay off his debts directly from his own computer under his name, his banking information, his personal wire transfer. He trusted Mizuhara enough, according to the reports, to put his own name on the line. That doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry. That really, I don't care. There's a lot of lawyers involved, and I do want to be careful because even though this show is not one of the biggest ones in the world by any means, I'm trying to cover my own ass here, and I think you guys will appreciate that and understand that. You can't tell me I don't trust my interpreter enough to give him the cash because I'm afraid that he's going to spend it on gambling again or put himself deeper into the hole by betting on another parlay or another straight bet. I shouldn't say that because we don't know that as a fact. I'm saying we do know he did not trust him enough because he did not want him to use the money to bet further. You can't say that and then say, but I trust him enough to put my own name on the line, my own reputation, my own money on the line, and pay the bookie directly. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Another thing here, when it comes to the word trust, Shohei's spokesperson initially told ESPN, trying to come off as, we have nothing to hide, we want to be as transparent about this as possible. Why don't you sit down with, or why don't you interview Mizuhara, Ippei Mizuhara, and talk to him yourself on a 90-minute interview via the phone? And why don't you let him tell your side of the story? Because we trust him enough to explain the circumstances to you and what happened. But then literally the next day after the interview is done, you tell that same reporter, the spokesperson tells that same reporter, don't trust Mizuhara. Don't trust what he said in that interview. He's lying. He robbed Shohei. He was good enough to trust yesterday. You trusted him enough to be a beacon of context and of information in this story. You trusted him enough to put him not under oath, but under the scrutiny of journalism and under the scrutiny of an interview that didn't seem super hostile in its wording. Mizuhara didn't seem nervous. Apparently, the spokesperson was on that call. He, at no point do we know throughout this interview, at no point did he stop the interview or cut off Mizuhara or say that's not true. He was listening in on the call the entire time, or she, I shouldn't assume, I have no idea. I haven't seen the spokesperson's name literally anywhere. I've just seen it referred to as spokesperson or spokesman. So maybe it is a man. I have no idea. But the spokesperson doesn't trust him enough after the fact to say, yeah, run with the story. We gave you that interview. We trusted him. We trusted you to sit down with him. We trusted he would tell you the truth. But now, after everything's said and done, after the article's ready to print, I actually don't trust him. That doesn't make any sense. Shohei is going to speak today. Like I said, I don't know what he's going to say. I'm not going to wait around to see. This show needs to go out. I think the MLB knows exactly what they are doing. They are trying to protect their biggest star, as any league in the world would. Can we really blame them? But this is getting ridiculous. Everybody's trying to hold off blame. I'm not blaming Shohei Ohtani. I'm not even mentioning a lifetime ban. But there is a question that needs to be asked in all of this that hopefully Shohei will answer today. Did Shohei Ohtani bet on baseball? If his agent answers no, really don't care what the agent has to say, to be honest. If the spokesperson says no, really don't care what the spokesperson has to say, to be honest. If Shohei maybe says publicly, on camera, in this press conference, I didn't bet on baseball, I'll feel a little bit better. But to be honest, at this point, with the amount of changes and turns and twists that this story has taken, I am only going to believe it when I see a government affidavit, some sort of FBI document, some sort of federal investigation document, or an admission from the MLB or a statement saying, we have come to the conclusion that there is no evidence that Shohei Ohtani placed bets on baseball. I have to see something like that before I truly feel comfortable, because that is the question. That single question is the difference between baseball life and death. That is the difference between this becoming Pete Rose Part 2, White Sox Part 2, and it being a fine or a suspension. But hey, you get to come back and play the game that you love, or at least the game that we think you love. What I'm starting to realize about Shohei, and it's not an indictment, it is an indictment on him, but it's not meant to be an offensive, it's not meant to be in an offensive way or attacking him in any way. It's just the reality of life in 2024. We don't know any of these people at their core. We don't know their character. We don't know what they do behind closed doors. Even with social media making it seem like people are more transparent than ever, we know that people put on a facade on social media. We know that especially athletes, that's controlled by a PR person. That's controlled by a social media marketing person. We don't know everything going on in an athlete's life. There have been plenty of situations since 2010, since the introduction of the smartphone, that tell us we don't know who people are, even the ones who post the most, even the influencers, even the people who live their lives on social media or in the public eye. You never really know. And it is an indictment a little bit on Shohei Ohtani. I'm interested to see what he will say, but I will not let what he has to say hold me back or hold me hostage or delay me saying what I want to say on the matter any longer. This story is nowhere near done. So we're just a month away from the NFL draft, and I haven't been this excited about an NFL draft in a few years, to be honest. I know we had Burrow. I know we had Trevor Lawrence a couple years ago. I know we had some great talents come out of the NFL and into the NFL draft, and we know they're going to be stars. But this just feels different because there's so much talent. I think the best first-round talent, they always say, there's only about 15 guys who are really first-round grades, are good enough to be first-round grades, surefire things in the NFL draft. After that, it's a lot of second-round grades. It's a lot of figuring out who's NFL ready, who will fit your scheme, but it's not as much of a certainty as these first-round guys. Now this year, I feel like there's just so much talent. It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out with Michael Penix, with Bo Nix, with some of the better defensive talent that's sort of getting outshined in this draft. But I think the focus here, we have to talk about the top 5, because the top 5, depending on how this goes, is really going to dictate a lot throughout the course of the rest of this NFL draft. So I've got my graphic in front of me here. I'm going to look down a little bit throughout this. Let's put up the graphic. First round predictions, my 2024 mock draft, top 5. My first 5 selections in the draft. Number 1, going to the Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams, the chosen one, the best quarterback prospect in this draft class, the best quarterback prospect in several years. He could be a generational talent at the quarterback position. For years, we always said, man, that's Patrick Mahomes. Now that we know what he looks like, we'll know how to look for the next guy. Caleb Williams is the closest thing to Patrick Mahomes since Patrick Mahomes. And now that we know that playing style works in the NFL, how can you not take the chance on Caleb Williams, a Heisman Trophy winner, a generational prospect, someone who can make so many different throws, who at his pro day showed he's got a bomb of an arm, or he's capable of throwing bombs with his arm. He is an incredible talent at the position. I can't wait to see what he does in Chicago. I have high hopes for him. I am so excited about him with Keenan Allen, with DeAndre Swift, with DJ Moore, with a really solid defense in the second half of last season, in the second half of games as well. I can't wait to see how it plays out. Caleb Williams is a lock. He is the savior of Chicago potentially. He's going 1 to the Bears. Number 2, Jayden Daniels. I know there's been a big debate right now between Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels really over the last several months, but I think that the NFL consensus has been reached. I think the NFL as a whole has reached this consensus. They believe they know who the better quarterback is. It's no longer hoopla. It's no longer misdirection in the pre-draft process to try and sway off other teams. The reality of the situation is Jayden Daniels is a better quarterback right now than Drake Maye. He's made more NFL throws in the last 12 months, according to their highlight tapes of last season in college. He's more mobile than Drake Maye. He is a great dual threat quarterback. And right now, his arm, especially his throwing motion, is just more refined than Drake Maye. Drake Maye needs time. Jayden Daniels could very well be the kind of guy who steps in and is relatively good, maybe even great immediately. Jayden Daniels is going to go 2, which leaves Drake Maye, number 3, the Patriots. I think the Patriots are definitely going to go after a quarterback. They've been talking about it. They really want to make a big-time blockbuster grab for a guy like T. Higgins or Justin Jefferson is what the rumors are. Will they get to? I don't know. But that tells me they are trying to find a great wide receiver to pair up with a potentially great quarterback prospect in Drake Maye. It'll take some time to develop him, and because of that, I believe that even though the upside is absolutely there when it comes to Drake Maye, he's not going to go 2 to Washington. Washington, with a defensive-minded head coach, doesn't want to mentor somebody as much as they'd have to mentor Drake Maye. They're going to want Jayden Daniels, which means Drake Maye falls to 3, the Patriots. I don't think he falls any more than that. Number 4, this is where the trade comes in. J.J. McCarthy to the Minnesota Vikings. I believe the Arizona Cardinals like what they have in Kyler Murray. They're not going to draft another quarterback, but they also feel they don't need to be this high up to draft a great weapon or a nice supporting cast or maybe multiple members to a nice new supporting cast. They're going to trade down. They like the value down in the early first and the late first round better, rather. They're going to give that pick to the Vikings, and the Vikings will select their franchise guy who they believe is J.J. McCarthy. Right now, based on rumors, it feels like the Giants and the Vikings are competing right now. They both like J.J. McCarthy. Apparently, the Giants are upset that it got out that they wanted J.J. McCarthy. Like I said earlier, I don't believe that this is pre-draft hoopla. I don't believe this is any more misdirection. This is the desperation. Minnesota, I've told you for several months now, they are going to want a quarterback, and they want to go young at quarterback. J.J. McCarthy feels like the perfect guy. People criticize Kirk Cousins so much, but in the end, there are so many people out there, including myself, including other NFL general managers, including NFL staff who believe Kirk Cousins, whether you hate him or love him, is a top 10 quarterback when he's playing his best football, maybe even top 8, maybe numbers-wise you can say top 5. But as a talent and a total quarterback, I think you'd say he's probably top 10 easily. There are people who like Kirk Cousins' playing style, which is just being a good quarterback with a good arm and a good distributor of the football and putting the hands of great talent like Justin Jefferson, like Jordan Addison, like TJ Hawkinson. What more could you ask for? I think they have a great coach in Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, an offensive-driven guy, someone who is a true quarterback whisperer. He wants a young guy he can mentor. He feels like J.J. McCarthy is the perfect fit, someone who, if nothing else, just knows how to win, who's a gamer, who has had a lot of experience winning, a lot of experience in big moments, and is not shy of the biggest moments. I think they really like what they see in J.J. McCarthy, and they're going to go up to 4 to make sure the Giants can't get him at 6, and they're going to make sure the Giants can't trade up to 5 to the Chargers in order to get him. Let's move on to the Chargers, the 5th overall pick. I do not believe they trade down. I think the Chargers are going to end up drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. with the 5th overall pick. They're going to stay there. Why, Ben? In my opinion, Jim Harbaugh likes to run the ball, and he loves the trenches, right? No one is denying that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say the reason that Jim Harbaugh ended up choosing the Chargers as his destination for his next head coaching spot was because of Justin Herbert, the guy under center. He wants to be able to, when necessary, and maybe even a little bit more so than when necessary, be able to throw the ball with a superstar quarterback, a superstar talent, one of the best quarterback prospects, or one of the best quarterback talents this league has seen in a long time. Physically, from a stature point of view, they like what they have in Justin Herbert. That's why they paid him, and it's the reason why Harbaugh ended up going there. Right now, their draft core, their wide receiver core is pretty anemic. They have Quentin Johnson, QJ from last year's draft, and they have someone else on there. Let me quickly see if I can find out who it is. They do not like what they have in this year's draft. They are not super high on the potential prospects that they have viewed throughout this process and the guys that they have on the roster. Remember, I can't find the name right now, but their wide receiver core is pretty low right now in terms of talent. They released Mike Williams. They traded Keenan Allen. They have QJ from last year's draft, but he didn't prove to be anything special. They need to go out there and get a superstar wide receiver talent to make sure that wide receiver core is not anemic, to make sure they have someone for Justin Herbert to be able to throw the ball to. In my opinion, think about the context here. Jim Harbaugh was the head coach at Michigan. He faced off against Marvin Harrison Jr. throughout his Ohio State career more than anybody did. When you see a player like that and what they're capable of, it's hard for me not to believe Jim Harbaugh has a soft spot for Marvin Harrison Jr., and he's going to stay at 5 to make sure he can draft him before anybody else does, especially when you consider just how anemic that wide receiver room is for the Chargers. Feels like it makes sense. To me, that's the top 5. You may disagree. I think that these are great selections for these teams. Of course, you really can't grade a prospect or grade a draft pick until 2-3 years down the line, but I think each of these teams feels very comfortable in these spots. I don't think any of this is a hot take. I think this is just a reality of how it'll play out. I am so excited for the draft, and I can't wait to see who goes where. I am so genuinely excited. Tonight, we get to see the Iowa Hawkeyes tip off at least one more time during this tournament. Caitlin Clark at 8 p.m. Can't wait to watch. I don't think it'll be their last time tipping off in the tournament, but you never know with these kind of upsets. Although I will say, statistically, they are less likely to happen on the women's side of the tournament. That's very interesting. I wonder if that has anything to do with women being maybe a little bit more mature, not letting the moment necessarily get to them, being better under pressure. I'm not sure what it is. It's not a bashing men thing. It's not a bashing women thing or putting women over either. I just think that it's definitely an interesting thing to keep an eye out for, though. Statistically, the women's side has less upsets. That's undeniable. So I think that's definitely an interesting nugget. Hopefully, it means we'll get to continue seeing Caitlin Clark and this Iowa Hawkeyes team just absolutely cook the other teams that they go against. South Carolina, though, they are cooking on the other side of the bracket. They are doing amazing right now. I can't wait to see how this plays out. But Caitlin Clark, 27 points, nice win against Holy Cross. Was really was a little bit sloppy maybe of a start. Caitlin did a great job of getting her teammates involved early. The game was close, pretty close throughout the first quarter, I'd say, up until about the last 2 minutes of the first quarter. Then Iowa got on a roll. Caitlin started scoring on her own. In addition to getting her teammates involved, she is just such a talented basketball player. I think her ability to get her teammates involved, I'm going to stress that a lot today and right now. That is not being talked about enough. She is a great scorer. She is the most prolific scorer in college basketball, in women's college basketball history. I think that's undeniable. Maybe even as a whole, right? When you take into account the fact that she's the all-time leader in points for both the men and women, regardless. But I'm really excited to see how she does. Really excited to watch how they do tonight. But after the game, she made headlines when she said, quote, "People are more excited about the women's side than the men's side." Caitlin Clark was talking about the excitement surrounding the women's NCAA tournament. And let's just start here. Statistically, she's absolutely correct. On March 5th, during an interview about women's college basketball taking place on Fox, according to Michael Mulvihill, who's the president of Insight and Analytics at Fox Sports, women's games are averaging 981,000 viewers compared with 946,000 for the men. So statistically, right off the bat, for all the argument that was going on the internet and all the hoopla and all the people getting pissed off at what Caitlin Clark said, statistically, she is absolutely correct. There is nothing wrong with what she said. People are more interested right now in watching women's college basketball compared to men's. Why is that? I'll leave that to you to decide. Has one and done kind of destroyed college basketball culture on the men's side? Maybe so. That's something to look at. But the women have never been more talented. They've never been better coached. There have never been more superstars in women's college basketball. There are certain things that are just undeniable. And I'll tell you from my own perspective. I gave you the stats, and now I'm going to give you my own perspective. And this may piss off a lot of people. I really don't care. Over the weekend, or the last 3 days really, I watched Iowa versus Holy Cross, Baylor versus Virginia Tech, UNC versus Michigan State, South Carolina dominated Presbyterian, Syracuse versus Arizona, Gonzaga versus UC Irvine, UCLA versus Cal Baptist, UNC got destroyed by South Carolina. The second South Carolina game that I watched over the weekend, LSU versus Middle Tennessee, Baylor versus Virginia Tech, Stanford beat Iowa last night. I watched that one as well. That's 11 games that I watched live. I'm not saying I watched the entire thing, but I tuned in for at least a quarter of those games. I tuned in for at least a quarter of 11 women's college basketball games during the March Madness frenzy and during this tournament. You want to know how many men's games I've tuned in for this year during March Madness? 0. I have caught some clips on Twitter, on X. I've seen some highlights on YouTube, but I'll be honest, I haven't even finished the highlights on YouTube for some of the men's games. I didn't watch a single one of them live, and I haven't finished a single highlight tape of any of them. I'll eventually tune in for the last few games, but right now, in terms of overall interest in the sport, it's undeniable. Caitlin Clark is absolutely correct. People, myself included, are way more interested in watching these women cook and watching these women succeed and watching these women just dominate the college basketball scene, watching them compared to the men. The men right now, because of one and done, because of the lack of talent, because of the lack of, dare I say, brand awareness surrounding a lot of these guys, we just don't care. We love the names in women's college basketball. So much great talent from last season who came back. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, so many other teams and teammates and people that I could mention, right? LSU really got a lot of the headlines. Caitlin Clark and Iowa, plenty of them. South Carolina, deservingly so. But there's also a lot of new emerging stars that have scored. Like I saw one girl whose name slips my mind, and I apologize, that scored 40 points in her opening debut in a March Madness tournament as a freshman. Like the women, like I said, women's basketball, women's college basketball has never been more talented. They've never been better coached, and I've never been more interested in them. And I think for the most part, most of the college basketball world and fandom would agree, we have never been more interested in women's basketball. And it comes at a time, unfortunately for the men, where we're just not as interested in them, and they are just not performing, and the stars aren't there, and the talent just isn't there for me to feel like I need to invest my time in them. I'm much more invested right now in the women's tournament. I have no embarrassment in saying that. I don't take this a step further. If the WNBA was a stock, man, I wish I wasn't a broke college student. If I had money, I would be handing over money, hand over fist, for ownership in a WNBA team, for just a spot in that game, in that league. Because the reality is there are so many great stars right now who are coming out of college over the next 3 years from the women's side that will head into the WNBA. The WNBA is going to explode. You can tell by ratings. You can tell by ticket sales. You can tell by interest in these young women. You can clown all you want in comment section. And I think one of the things that I'm in college, right? So I've heard this a lot in hallways and as a joke and whatnot. The one thing that men and women have in common is that men hate women and women hate women. And I've always cringed whenever I've heard it. And it's an unfortunate, not catalyst, but it is the unfortunate thought behind, I think, all of this hatred that you see from the men on the women's sports and on the women's tournament. I think it's disgusting, quite frankly. I don't need to profess my own opinion on this really, or my own backing, but believe me, I have supported women in sports, women personally, women professionally, women on the court for a long time. And I think it's kind of ridiculous. I think you can make fun all you want. The women's side has never been more talented. They have never been more committed. They have never been better coached. They have never been more interesting, and I'm really excited for them. And I think that the WNBA, if it was a stock, I would be so ready to buy in now. And you can laugh all you want. The WNBA is on the verge of explosion because of all the stars that are going to come out of women's college basketball. That's undeniable, and you need to be on the lookout for it. So let's get to the breaking news today in the NFL world. They have officially, as of this morning, banned the hip drop tackle. Interesting time, interesting move. This comes just days after a report that, quote, the NFL is concerned about the lack of scoring and would like to have more scoring. Points per game have fallen from 49 points in 2020 to 43.5 points in 2023. And I think when you look at it, what is the change a result of? In 2023, there were 66 different quarterbacks who recorded a start in the NFL. What does that mean? That means you have backup quarterbacks. Why is that? Because you have starting quarterbacks going down due to injury. Some of the biggest stars in the league, like Joe Burrow and Aaron Rodgers and countless others, missed a significant amount of time, missed the entirety of the season. Kirk Cousins, I could go on and on and on. And because of that, you have to put in backup quarterbacks. And backup quarterbacks are backup quarterbacks for a reason. They are not as capable. They are not as great. They are not superstars like their starting counterparts are. And when you put those guys under center, you're going to be more limited offensively. You're not going to have the big-time plays. You're not going to score as many points. And because of that, fans we know like points, especially in 2023 and 2024, and they're going to switch the channel and they're going to stop watching. And so this hurts the NFL's bottom line. So they need to do something about protecting the quarterbacks. What are they going to do? They've enforced so many rules. The rule they're now going to enforce is the hip drop tackle. And it's interesting because I've talked about it on the show. I'm a big fan of Pat McAfee, and one of their biggest hosts on the show, AJ Hawk, who tunes in starting in hour 2, who is the all-time leading tackler for the Green Bay Packers, former defensive player in the NFL, right? He has always talked about the hip drop tackle, especially in recent years, as like, what is that? 10 years ago, the hip drop tackle wasn't a thing in the NFL. It's only being talked about now in the last 3 years, really, because of the potential ruling that could be made about it. And what AJ Hawk has always said is the hip drop tackle when I was in the league was never something that we, talked about. It wasn't necessarily a technique. It was just a kind of tackle that ended up happening when you need to get a guy down on the ground and you just thought, okay, maybe in order to get him down, I have to use my weight. And thus the hip drop motion, right? Landing on the quarterback, landing on their legs. It's not really a malicious intent, according to what AJ Hawk said. It was just more of a byproduct of the tackle and what they were trying to do, which was get down the quarterback, get down the runner. But here's the thing now. This rule is one of the few in the NFL rule book and the guidelines and things that have been banned that will now require NFL officials to take into account intent when it comes to a hit or when it comes to a tackle. Was there malicious intent? Was there a bad intent? What was the tackler or the defensive player's intentions when he wrapped his arms around that quarterback and dropped his hips on him and dropped his weight on him and dropped his weight on his legs? You're now asking the officials to take into account intent and what another player was thinking. And what you think you see in body language, or what you think rather, just let's leave it there, what you think is subjective to everyone, which means there's not going to be a set in stone ruling on this. There's going to be a lot of different ways that this ruling goes. This is going to be a very subjective execution of a rule depending on what official is on the field that day. And it's not going to be cookie cutter, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It is going to be a subjective decision made by people who think they are just being objective, but are really using their own opinion on what's happening. And because of that, there could be tremendous fallout of this rule next season, depending on how harshly, how strictly, or how lax this rule is enforced next season, depending on who it happens to and when it happens and what the circumstance is, because it is going to happen next season. A hip drop tackle is going to occur against the quarterback. Does it result in injury? Does the official call it as a hip drop tackle? Will they enforce the penalty? Will they enforce the punishment? That is going to be very subjective because you're asking these different officials to take into account intent. It's not a set in stone thing. It's not a threshold. It's just depending on what you in your mind believe is a threshold for intent or bad intent or a malicious intent. It is subjective, and I think that could lead to problems. Now, does the NFL foresee these problems, and do I dare say they want it? I've talked about this for a couple of years now on this show and even before it. The NFL, for a reason, has never... The NFL, let's start here. The NFL has never moved to full-time referees. They have never decided to say, you know what, let's have full-time NFL referees on the payroll. It's been a big conversation in recent years. There are not full-time positions as an NFL official in the NFL. Why have they not moved it? It's not a money thing. The NFL is making more money than ever. Their ratings are higher than ever. The TV deals are more lucrative than ever. They are killing it when it comes to sponsorships and endorsements. The sports books getting involved. The NFL, if there's one thing they're lacking, it ain't money. So it's not a money issue when it comes to bringing on and implementing full-time referees. In my opinion, the reason it has not been done is because the NFL doesn't feel the need to make a long-term investment in full-time referees because they believe there's not going to be full-time referees in 10, 15 years. That is truly my personal opinion. The NFL has always been at the tip of the spear when it comes to evolution in sports, specifically in officiating and rules in sports and guidelines and how they go about things. I believe that the NFL believes they are going to switch over to an AI-based model or to a computer-based model or a replay system that doesn't require human error, that doesn't entail human error, and they're going to get the humans out of the game when it comes to an officiating standpoint because they don't want emotions or subjectivity or objectivity to get involved in the game. They don't want referees to be interpreting rules, which is what's so surprising about this hip drop tackle. You're now asking NFL officials to evaluate intent of a different player, which is subjective to what they think intent is. That is their own reading of body language, of the situation, of the player, of what they know of that player, of what they know of the circumstance. This is why it doesn't make any sense. And to me, I dare wonder, does the NFL want the NFL officials to mess up here? That way they can move over even quicker to non-human error, non-human manned officiating and referees. Because the reality is, if they wanted to implement full-time referees, they would have already done it. It's not a money issue. It's not a staffing issue. It's not an education issue from their standpoint. It is simply a matter of evolution and of investment. Do they feel like the investment makes sense? I don't think they do. That's why they haven't implemented it, because they think the game is moving to AI, to online, to robots, to replays, to a game that is officiated and governed by non-human elements and things. I know it sounds like a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's a little bit nerdy, a little bit too complex. I hope I broke it down the way that I've seen it over the past couple of years, but that is my opinion. We are getting closer and closer and closer to the NFL saying, we're moving to AI refs. We're moving to the chat GPT of refs. That's what I think we're moving closer and closer to. With that being said, that is all for today's show. I hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back next week, of course, on Monday. Some real interesting stuff developing across the league. Interested in seeing what Shohei Ohtani will say. Right now, it is 11:10. It is 1:07 p.m. Eastern time at the time of ending this episode. And Shohei Ohtani has not spoken just yet. Can't wait to break it down next week. Until then, I'm Benjamin Cure. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you next time.